Are classical theists in fact atheists? This is the claim made by Daniel Dennett in his book Breaking the Spell, Religion as a Natural Phenomenon. And as it says in this particular article which I'm looking at, Dennett seems bent on having a straw man to attack. And in this particular article, which I don't want to read through, a philosophical argument against Dennett is made. But I want to make a simpler argument today, an argument based on the scriptures, a biblical argument against Dennett's claim. And his claim is basically this. He says that the concept of God has migrated in the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity and Islam, away from a concrete anthropomorphism to ever more abstract and depersonalised concepts. In other words, that the early version of God was a superman, as he puts it down here, a superman, and definitely a man, not a woman. And the newer version of God that's defended by theists, especially of a philosophical mindset, classical theists, the newer version of God is completely depersonalised, anti-anthropomorphic, and nothing more than an abstraction. Alright, so one of the things about this particular article, which is a very good article in response to this claim, is that it doesn't actually deny the fundamental premise regarding the scriptural revelation, regarding the Old Testament Jehovah. Is it true that the Old Testament Jehovah is represented simply as anthropomorphic? And the answer is no. This is in fact untrue. If we look at Deuteronomy chapter 4, we find that this is said. God speaking to his people. Therefore watch yourselves very carefully, since you saw no form on the day that the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire. Beware lest you act corruptly by making a carved image for yourselves, in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal. It goes on to say the likeness of any bird, anything that creeps on the ground, any fish, sun, moon, stars, all the host of heaven. It warns against them being drawn away to bow down and serve them. So, right here at the core of the law given to the Jewish people, we have this horror of idolatry. Now, one of the distinctive features about early Judaism is this monotheism, this idea that there is one God and that you must only worship him. That's a very important concept, yes. But the second to it, and indeed the commandment directly after it in the Ten Commandments, is this complete condemnation, this complete rejection of all forms of idolatry, of any attempt to make or to worship any image of God. It says here, you saw no form. So beware lest you act corruptly by making a carved image for yourselves, in the form of any figure, even down to stars, sun and moon, or stellar objects, the host of heaven. It didn't matter what it was, on earth or in heaven, nothing was a true representation of God. Neither male nor female, contrary to what Dennett says. God is simply beyond this, beyond the physical, and he cannot be represented by a physical image truly and rightly. That complete rejection of the suitability of images to represent God is fundamental to Judaism. So therefore, any claim that early monotheism, the monotheism of the early Jews, was that God was simply a superman, can be ruled out straight away. Now, is it true that there was anthropomorphic language used of God? In other words, speaking of God in human terms? Well, of course there was. Speaking to a non-philosophical people, of course God would reveal himself in ways that were understandable. He would use metaphor. That makes sense. But at the same time as he was using those metaphors, He was defending his people against misunderstanding them. He was protecting against misunderstanding by using paradox in the revelation. So if we look at Exodus 33, we have the statement that the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. So the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. Okay, that sounds very anthropomorphic. But then we go down a bit further in the same chapter, the very same chapter, so just a little further down, same passage. Speaking to Moses, the one who he speaks to face, but he said, "You cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live." You cannot see my face. And if you did see my face, if you saw my glory, because in fact Moses doesn't ask to see so much his face but his glory. Please show me your glory. To see God in his full glory, to understand God in his full glory, would undo us, so to speak. So God makes it very clear that he cannot be put in an anthropomorphic box, and he makes it clear from the very foundation principles of Judaism, from the very earliest demands made in the law. And so when we understand this deliberate use of paradox, again, things that seem to be inconsistent in the same chapter, deliberately put there, virtually next to each other, we can understand that God is using anthropomorphic language in revealing himself to his people in an understandable, useful way, but at the same time he's protecting the message against misunderstanding by showing that he cannot be put into a simple anthropomorphic box. So the main problem with Dennett's claim is that it's simply factually incorrect. The early monotheism, like classical theism, philosophically speaking, in the modern world and in the medieval world and the ancient world, these are the same theism that reject the idea that God is a physical object and affirm quite clearly his transcendence of our categories and our images.